The push that shook the town. "Get that veteran out! He smells like the street!" The words ripped through the thick, humid air like a gunshot. Councilman Royce Dillard didn't whisper. He didn't mutter. He shouted them across the entire diner, loud enough for the cook in the back and the bus boys sweeping near the soda machine to hear. And every single head turned except one, the man being screamed at. Marshall Grant didn't flinch. He just stood there, 74 years old, spine still straight despite the war-torn back and half-healed ribs. His faded M65 jacket hung loose on his thin frame, and a tattered paper bag dangled from his calloused fingers. A black beanie clung to his head like the last piece of dignity he had left. Sweat and dust covered his boots. His dog tag, tucked beneath the collar, still bore the burn mark from a blast in Kandahar. The heat outside was unbearable Alabama July kind of heat, the kind that made the pavement bubble and the air buzz. Shiloh Diner sat off Highway 231, not much more than an aging roadside stop for truckers, soldiers from Fort Rucker and townsfolk grabbing pie on a slow afternoon. But at that exact moment it became something else. A courtroom without a judge, a stage without a script, and the man at the center had already been sentenced. "You're making people lose their appetite?" Dillard spat, adjusting his Rolex as if the very presence of Marshall somehow offended its shine. "Go stink up the sidewalk." Marshall didn't reply. He hadn't come for charity. He hadn't come for pity. He came for hot water, not to drink, but to warm a tin of beans he had saved for 3 days. His back had been seizing up since dawn, and the last pill the VA gave him had run out a week ago. He didn't ask for a seat or service, just warmth from a cup, from a counter, from anywhere that didn't smell like concrete and defeat. He stood there quietly, like men who've learned long ago that speaking too loud gets you ignored faster. Emily Harper, stood frozen behind the counter. Her hands still smelled of dish soap and black coffee. She had seen a lot of hard men come and go through that diner, but there was something in Marshall's eyes that hit her square in the chest, something ancient, something tired, something noble. She remembered him now, barely. A blurry childhood memory of being pulled from a burning trailer by a man in uniform. Couldn't be. Could it? "Sir," Emily said gently, stepping toward Marshall, towel still slung over her shoulder. "Why don't you come in for a minute? I've got some iced tea that was just poured." "Are you deaf?" Dillard interrupted. "I said out. Unless you want to be next, miss." People stared, but no one moved. Forks froze midair. A trucker looked away. A woman clutched her purse closer. Marshall, still silent, turned to go. And then it happened. Dillard reached forward, not violently, not theatrically, just a push, subtle enough for deniability, but hard enough. Marshall stumbled back, lost his footing, and landed hard on the sun-scorched concrete. The bag ripped. Dog tag. Medical papers. A folded photo of a woman with "Forever Yours, Maggie" scribbled in pen, all scattered like debris from a crash. The camera on a teenager's phone filming from a corner booth didn't miss a second. Marshall lay there, not groaning, not crying, just breathing through his nose slowly, like he was back in a sandstorm and had to wait for the wind to pass. Emily ran outside, dropped to her knees, gathering the papers with trembling hands. "Leave them," Dillard said. "He knows where the garbage is." That's when she stood. Emily Harper, former nursing student, now waitress, with grease on her apron and scars on her pride. She stared Dillard straight in the eye and said, "If feeding a veteran is wrong, I don't want to be right." She returned inside, retrieved a return plate of chicken and mashed potatoes, still warm, slid it onto a tray and placed it gently in front of Marshall. But Dillard wouldn't let her go quietly. "You're fired. Go pack your pity." She didn't argue. Just untied her apron, folded it once, and walked outside to sit next to Marshall on the sidewalk. 2 people. No words, just heat and shame and silence. The cook shut off the fryer. A woman in the corner left without paying. A baby cried, and still no one stood up. Now let me ask you something. If you saw a decorated veteran, one who had carried wounded men through enemy fire, who had lost his wife, his home, and was now just trying to survive, if you saw him get pushed down like a dog in front of a room full of people, what would you do? Would you speak up? Would you walk away? Or would you pretend you didn't see it? Let us know in the comments. Type the word respect below if you believe no veteran should ever be treated this way. Later that day, the video hit the internet. Grainy, shaky footage, but you could hear every word. Get that veteran out. He smells like the street. You could see the push. You could see the fall. You could see the world look away. By midnight, the clip had 72,000 shares. By morning, over 500,000. And by then, 5 black SUVs, each bearing a discreet military flag, had left Montgomery heading south. Inside one of them, a woman with silver hair, a face lined not by age, but by consequence, leaned forward and made a single call. Find him. Tell Marshal Grant we never forgot. The outrage that echoed overnight. This town won't elect a mayor who bullies a veteran. That was the first comment pinned under the viral video before sunrise. And it didn't come from a stranger. It came from Grace Lindholm, a retired army nurse, 42 years in Dothan. Within hours, her post was shared by veteran groups in 3 different states, a Gold Star Mothers page, and even a former sergeant who once served under Marshal Grant. By 7:00 a.m., the video had hit over 620,000 views, and the diner's parking lot was deserted. Inside, the windows were dark. No clatter of silverware, no hiss from the grill. The world was no longer pretending it hadn't seen. Across the street behind the diner, Marshall sat on the loading dock in the shade trying to tape his papers back together. The Alabama sun was already climbing, and so were the whispers. If you've made it this far, you know this isn't just about a diner or a single push. It's about what we do when no one's watching. If you believe stories like Marshals deserve to be heard, hit subscribe. If you believe stories like Marshals deserve to be heard. Because what happens next will shake more than just a town. Emily Harper arrived just after sunrise, still in the same jeans and faded t-shirt from the day before, no apron this time. In her hand was a paper tray with 2 biscuits and a thermos. She sat beside Marshall without asking and offered the food. "You didn't have to sit out here all night," she said quietly. Marshall didn't look up, didn't want to be seen again. Emily didn't respond. She didn't need to. She just poured some coffee into the cap of the thermos and handed it to him. He took it like it was the last warm thing on earth. Then came the sound of a horn. Not a car, not a truck, a motorcycle, followed by another and another. They came down Highway 231, slowly, flags fluttering behind them. 6 bikes in total, everyone ridden by a veteran from the local Legion Riders. They circled the block once, then parked across the street side by side. No words, just presence. Moments later, a group of townspeople arrived, some in old military jackets, others in church clothes. They lined the sidewalk. One man carried a sign, "He fought for us. We stand for him." Across town, Councilman and Royce Dillard was pacing. Hair still perfect, shirt newly pressed, but there was a crack behind his polished surface. The press had been calling since 5 a.m. His inbox was full. His campaign sponsor had withdrawn. And yet he called another press conference. At 9:00 a.m. outside City Hall, Dillard faced cameras with a practiced smile and said, "I acted within the rights of any small business to protect its customers and its image. That man was not harassed, he was asked to leave." But before he could continue, a worn combat boot flew through the air and landed with a heavy thud at the foot of the podium. Dillard froze. The cameras didn't. He carried men out of burning buildings while you hid behind press releases, someone shouted. Chaos erupted. The press conference ended early. Dillard rushed back into the building without answering a single question. But the town wasn't finished. At exactly 10:17 a.m., a second video surfaced. A different angle. Footage from a security camera behind the diner, footage that caught Dillard inside the kitchen, his voice low but clear. If that bum costs me this election, I'll make sure he never gets another benefit in this town. That sentence was all it took. The video hit 1 million views before noon. National veterans organizations issued statements within the hour. A Navy SEAL Foundation retweeted it with the caption, "You just messed with the wrong veteran." And across every screen, from phones to news stickers, one name kept reappearing: Marshall Grant. At 11:02 a.m., 5 black SUVs slowed to a stop in front of Shiloh Diner. They didn't honk. They didn't blast sirens. They just parked one behind the other. On the hood of the lead vehicle, a single flag snapped in the heat, the 4-star General Standard. The doors opened. Out stepped General Ruth Callahan in civilian clothes, silver hair pinned tight, a single bronze star on her lapel. Behind her, veterans from across 3 branches. They weren't here for show. They were here because of something deeper, something old. Marshall looked up. His hands stopped moving. His breathing caught. She crossed the pavement slowly, then stopped in front of him. For a moment, the heat disappeared. The noise faded. It was just the two of them. She removed her cap. "Colonel Grant," she said, "permission to stand beside you, sir?" He tried to speak. Couldn't. Just nodded once. Then he stood. No fanfare, no speeches. Just a man rising, bones aching back, still straight. And as he saluted her, every veteran in the crowd raised their hands in return. The scene was electric. Someone whispered, "I haven't seen that since '91. Another cried quietly. A local reporter captured the moment. The headline went viral before the video did. He was thrown to the ground. He stood taller than them all. And yet, the most unexpected twist hadn't happened. Because just after noon, a young man arrived carrying a small envelope. He walked past the crowd and approached Emily. "This was left at City Hall," he said. "Addressed to Mr. Grant." Inside was a single sheet of paper, handwritten, no signature. I watched the video. "I am ashamed. My name is Royce Dillard, Sr. I served in Korea, and I raised a son who forgot everything I fought for. Please accept this letter. It's the only apology I know how to give." Emily read it aloud. Marshall didn't say a word. But he folded the letter with care and placed it next to Maggie's photo in his bag. The press asked for interviews. He declined. The crowd offered donations. He refused. All he accepted was respect. Type "respect" in the comments if you believe this country should never forget those who served it silently. And subscribe now to follow Marshall's story. Part 3 will reveal what even the medals never told. When silence wasn't enough anymore, he saved 12 of us under fire, and we let him be thrown out like trash. The words weren't spoken into a microphone. They weren't said for the press. They were whispered, hoarse, trembling, and filled with guilt by Sergeant Jim Cortez, a man who hadn't spoken to another soldier in over a decade. He stood in the back of the growing crowd across from Shiloh Diner, watching Marshall Grant salute General Callahan, and something inside him cracked open. By the time the video of that silent salute circled the country, a second conversation had already begun. Not on the news, not online, but in kitchens, veteran halls, nursing homes, and front porches, among people who suddenly remembered a face they'd forgotten or a kindness they never repaid. And in Dothan, Alabama, the ripple had turned into a storm. If you're watching this and your heart is already racing, you're not alone. Because what you're about to see, what happens when the full story of Marshall Grant comes to light, might just shake something loose in you. Subscribe now and type the word honor in the comments if you believe justice delayed should never mean justice denied. At City Hall, Royce Dillard's office door stayed closed, locked. Inside, the councilman sat in darkness, the blinds drawn, the phone ringing off the hook. But it wasn't campaign donors anymore. It was the Inspector General's office. It was the Department of Veterans Affairs. It was the Ethics Board. And outside, a quiet crowd had gathered. They weren't holding signs this time. They were holding folders, manila envelopes, dog tags, old discharge papers, each one held by a veteran who had at some point submitted a claim in this town and been denied. Now we know why one woman said, clutching her husband's framed Purple Heart. Now we know who made it harder for him to be seen. Because buried inside the second leaked video, not the diner security footage, but one that surfaced from a whistleblower at City Hall, was a spreadsheet. Dated, stamped, and signed by Dillard himself, a list of names with the word delay typed next to every single one. And Marshall Grant's was right at the top. The truth had cracked wide open. 15 years earlier, Marshall had submitted for an upgrade of benefits after complications from his war injuries worsened. The paperwork was clean, backed by records, but it never moved. It never reached federal review because Dillard, head of the local review committee at the time, had flagged it as unverifiable with no reason, no hearing, and no appeal. Why? Because Marshall had once publicly criticized a local veterans policy at a town hall. And Dillard, then just rising through the ranks, never forgot the embarrassment. It wasn't just neglect, it was personal retaliation, and as Kadi, now the town knew. And they were furious. Emily Harper stood beside Marshall as more and more veterans stepped forward. Some he didn't recognize, some he had trained. One man limped forward in tears, holding out a blood-stained Kevlar vest. "You dragged me back behind the wall in Fallujah," he said. "I didn't even know your name until yesterday. Sir, you saved my life." Another reached into his wallet and unfolded an old crumpled napkin. Written on it in faded ink were GPS coordinates and the words, "Hold 9 minutes, then move north." The napkin had been shoved into his hand by a lieutenant as explosions rained down. That lieutenant was Marshall Grant. One by one, stories spilled out. Not dramatic, not polished, just real. Meanwhile, at a news station across the state line, General Ruth Callahan sat across from a quiet journalist in a live broadcast watched by over 1 million people. "I was bleeding out in a ravine in Afghanistan," she said, voice low but unwavering. "And that man carried me across open ground under direct fire. He refused morphine until I was safe. I wear stars on my shoulder, but he wore the burden of being forgotten." The anchor blinked. "Why didn't he come forward all these years?" Callahan smiled softly. "Because the loudest men aren't always the most honorable. He didn't need to be seen. He just needed someone else to see, and now the whole country was watching." At 3:40 p.m., the Pentagon issued a statement recognizing Colonel Grant's previous service record as exemplary under extreme combat conditions. The VA reopened his case. But none of that moved Marshall. He still sat in his corner beside the diner, watching it all unfold as if it were happening to someone else. It wasn't until Emily knelt beside him, holding something wrapped in cloth, that his breath caught. She unwrapped it slowly. His silver star. The original. Not a replacement. "Where did you get this?" he asked. "A man came by this morning," she said. "Said his father pawned it years ago. Said it was time to return what belonged to a better man." Marshall took it in both hands, staring at it for a long time. Then he nodded just once. "You don't run from the fire," he whispered. "But sometimes you need someone to remind you that you came out of it. That night, Royce Dillard tried to give a televised apology. He read from a script, blamed stress, blamed misunderstanding, blamed context. But the people weren't listening anymore. What they remembered was the sound of Marshall's body hitting the pavement. What they remembered was the silence in the diner afterward. What they remembered, was who stood up and who didn't. In the end, Dillard was forced to resign, not by the law, but by the weight of his own legacy collapsing. The council chambers were empty the day he walked out, except for one folded note taped to his nameplate. It read, "This isn't about votes. This is about who you chose not to see." Outside, the sidewalk in front of Shiloh Diner had become something else. A gathering place, a shrine, a place where people left old medals, thank you notes, photos, and small American flags. No speeches, no ceremony, just presence. And Marshall Grant, he remained quiet. But now, he was no longer alone. What would you say to Marshall if you could sit beside him for 1 minute? Type the word "see" in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe if you believe we must never stay silent when someone is thrown aside for doing the right thing. Part 4 will break open the floodgates. The day honor was restored in broad daylight. The man you kicked out carried me through hellfire, and today I carry his name back into the light. General Ruth Callahan said those words without a microphone. She didn't need one. The entire block outside Shiloh Diner had gone silent the moment she stepped forward. Silver hair pulled back 4 stars embroidered subtly on the breast of her civilian jacket. But her voice carried through the heat like thunder after a drought. And Marshall Grant, standing beside her, didn't flinch. Not this time. If you've followed his story this far, you've seen the injustice, you've felt the humiliation, but now you're about to witness what it looks like when a town finds its soul again. Some names deserve to be remembered. Hit subscribe to remember his. Because what happens in the next few minutes will remind you why honor still matters in America. The street was packed. Veterans from as far as Texas and Tennessee had come overnight. Many brought their medals, some brought their families, and a few simply brought silence. The media tried to contain the moment, but it refused to be packaged. It was too human for headlines, too personal for scripts. Marshall didn't ask for any of it. He had stood there unsure of whether to show up at all. But General Callahan had sent a handwritten letter herself delivered by a young private. It simply read, "You showed up for us. Now let us show up for you." He came, quietly, in the same field jacket he had worn the day he was pushed down. But this time he didn't carry shame in that jacket. He carried memory. Mayor Patricia Holden, who had been silent throughout the scandal, emerged from City Hall that morning. She had been briefed, warned, and advised to avoid the cameras. Instead, she crossed the street on her own, no entourage, and walked straight up to Marshall. "I can't undo what was done," she said, her voice shaking, "but I can name what matters." She turned, faced the crowd, and raised a simple plaque made of oak and brass. It read, "Shiloh Square, dedicated in honor of Colonel Marshall E. Grant, whose quiet courage reminded us all what valor looks like." The applause didn't erupt. It rolled, like a wave hitting the shore after miles of silence. Some clapped, some saluted, others simply stood with hands over hearts, tears tracking through sunburn. But before the ceremony could end, a rumble came from the edge of town. A convoy. No, not government, not military. It was a procession of pickup trucks and motorcycles flying American flags, POW, MIA banners, and handmade signs. They had come from across the state, organized in a single night through a retired Marines Facebook group. They circled the square once, then parked and joined the crowd. No slogans, no chants, just a wall of presence behind Marshall. Then came the surprise no one saw coming. Emily Harper stepped forward carrying a small flat box. Inside was a folded American flag, an old photo of Marshall and Maggie on their wedding day, and a letter from the VA dated that morning. It granted full benefits, restoration, plus back pay dating to 2009. Someone overnight pushed this through, Emily said, barely holding back tears, and someone else hand-delivered it. Marshall looked at the crowd, then at the box, then at Emily, and finally he whispered, "Do I have to say anything?" Callahan stepped forward and smiled. "You already did. You stood up." But what happened next silenced even the veterans. A young girl, maybe 8 years old, walked out from the crowd holding a sheet of notebook paper. She handed it to Marshall. On it, in crooked handwriting, was written, "Thank you for saving the grown-ups. I want to be like you when I grow up." He read it twice. Then he sat down on the bench that had just been bolted into the sidewalk. His bench now under the plaque bearing his name, and placed the note carefully inside his jacket pocket. Reporters wanted interviews. Cameras pressed in. But he just raised his hand once again and saluted. Not to the cameras, not to the mayor, but to the flag that hung over Shiloh Diner's faded roof. The building itself, once a place of humiliation, had been bought out that morning by a coalition of veteran-owned businesses. Their plan to turn it into a community cafe where veterans eat free and no one is turned away. A chalk sign appeared in the window by noon. It read, "Welcome to Grant's Corner, where dignity is always on the menu." Inside, Emily was offered the job of general manager. She didn't say yes right away. She asked Marshall, "You sure you want your name on something that serves people like me?" He looked at her with the calm of a man who'd once stared down a sandstorm and kept moving forward. "I trust you with my life," he said. "Breakfast is easy." By sunset, the crowd was gone, but the story wasn't. Photos flooded social media. Veterans who hadn't spoken in years reached out to one another. One wrote, "I saw myself in him." Another, "I've been silent too long." Even Dillard, now disgraced, alone, and under investigation, watched it all unfold from a borrowed apartment. He scrolled through the footage and stopped at one image, Marshall holding the little girl's note, tears in his eyes but not on his cheek. That night, Dillard drove out to Shiloh Square under the cover of darkness. No cameras, no press. Just a man trying to face the thing he buried. He left a note taped to the bench. No name. It said, "You reminded me who my father wanted me to be." Marshall never commented on the note. He simply folded it and placed it next to the others in the old box that once held his discharge papers. That box now sat beneath the bench inside a sealed case with a plaque that read, "Memory is sacred. Silence is a choice. Honor is what we choose to remember." No one gets left behind. They tried to erase him. We turned him into a monument. Those were the words etched into the new bronze plaque outside the diner, now reborn as Grant's Corner. And they weren't just for Marshall Grant. They were for every veteran who had been overlooked, forgotten, discarded. For every man and woman who'd come home with scars they couldn't show and silence they didn't ask for. But on that bench in that square, something had shifted. Not just in Dothan, Alabama, but in the hearts of people watching from across the country. The morning after the dedication, Emily arrived early to unlock the doors. Sunlight poured through the freshly cleaned windows, casting soft beams onto the checkered floor. On each table sat a small metal stand with a sign, "Veterans Eat Free." No questions, no forms, just come home. Marshall was already there, sitting at his usual table in the corner, not in uniform, not making speeches, just peeling an orange slowly as if life was finally quiet enough to taste. But outside, someone unexpected waited. A boy, no more than 9, sandy hair, worn sneakers, and in his hands a cookie wrapped in wax paper and tied with string and a folded dollar bill. He walked in carefully, scanning the room, then made his way to the counter. Emily leaned down, her smile catching before it turned into tears. "I saw him on my mom's phone," the boy said. "He was brave like my grandpa. My grandpa helped people too." He placed the cookie and dollar gently on the counter. "Can you use this to help someone like him?" The room fell still. Marshall watched from the corner, eyes glassy. He didn't move, just listened, like he always had. Emily knelt beside the boy. "You just did." Across town, the fallout for Royce Dillard was just beginning. He hadn't shown his face in public since the resignation. The Ethics Board had opened a formal investigation into the denial of veteran claims during his term. Whistleblowers came forward, files were re-examined, and ordinary people started asking questions they should have asked years ago. But no one chased him. No one threw rocks. They didn't have to, because Dillard now lived with something worse than public shame. He lived with clarity. He watched from his apartment as local news ran a segment called "The Ones We Missed," featuring stories of veterans denied support in small towns all over the South. The face of Marshall Grant was always first. Then came others: a woman with a cane and a Bronze Star, a man with tremors and a Medal for Valor in Vietnam. Each one had been told to wait, to file again, to be patient. And now the country was listening. On the anniversary of the push that started it all, hundreds gathered once more in Shiloh Square. Some brought flags, some brought flowers, but one woman brought a suitcase. Inside was a folded uniform, a battered Bible, and a medal wrapped in velvet. She stood silently at the bench and then spoke, voice shaking. "My husband served with Colonel Grant in '03. He didn't make it home, but he wrote about a man who carried 3 of them under fire and refused evac until every other soldier was lifted first. That man was him. I never knew his name until last year, and now I just want to say thank you." She left the medal on the bench beside the little girl's note and the folded cookie wrapper from the boy. The case beneath the bench was growing fuller, but Marshall never spoke about any of it. Not the honor, not the medals, not even the letter from the White House signed in ink and framed on the wall of the cafe. Instead, he served coffee, wiped tables, held open doors for men in wheelchairs and teens in ROTC uniforms. One afternoon, a new recruit from Fort Rucker came in, unsure, eyes darting. "You really Marshall Grant?" he asked. Marshall didn't look up. "I used to be." The recruit blinked. "You still are, sir. My dad said you saved him in Iraq." Marshall looked at him for a long moment, then quietly, "Sit. Let's talk." That was his way. No ceremony, just presence. And when Emily asked him months later what he thought of everything that had happened, of the plaque, the interviews, the crowds, he said only this: "I didn't need them to remember me. I just needed them to remember what matters." In the end, Marshall Grant became something more than a man. He became a mirror for a town, for a country, for every person who ever wondered if silence was safer than standing up. And for Royce Dillard, sitting alone in his father's old house, going through letters he never answered, regrets he never said, and watching replays of a salute he never returned, Marshall Grant became the measure. Because when they buried Marshall 2 years later, the cafe shut down for a full day. Every table bore a single white rose, a flag flew at half-staff, and under his bench a new line was carved: "No one gets left behind, not if we choose to see." Let me ask you something. When you pass someone who looks tired, worn, silent, do you walk by, or do you ask their name? Because the story of Marshall Grant isn't just about war or honor or medals. It's about memory. It's about what we choose to forget and what we choose to lift up when it matters most. If this story moved you, type "never forgotten" in the comments. and share this with someone who still believes dignity is something earned and something we must protect. Thank you for watching, and thank you to those who stood when it was hardest.